U.S. cities with the most expensive rent. At number 5, Miami. At number 4, Boston. At number 3, San Jose. At number 2, San Francisco. And number 1, New York.
In today's business news, we're going to discuss rent. Everybody has to have a place to live. Some people own, some people rent. I told myself that when my rent reached at least $1,800, then I would be buying something instead. And about 5 years ago, that's what I did. And while home ownership has its challenges, it's helpful to know that the property will be paid off. But this video isn't about me, it's about rent. Let's take a look at this Forbes article entitled, "The Average Rent in Chicago Reaches Its Highest Point Ever." This article is from about a month ago. It says home prices have been through a whirlwind over the last 3 years, thanks mainly to the effects of the pandemic. When it first struck in 2020, home prices and rents declined, just as the economy as a whole took an initial nosedive. But as time wore on and the pandemic moved into the second year, 2021, American housing markets experienced an explosion of activity. Now, after several consecutive rate hikes by the Fed, American housing market activity has cooled off a bit as affordability has become an issue for many homebuyers.
The real reason why millennials cannot afford houses is that despite housing prices quadrupling over the last 20 years, the median income adjusted for inflation remains exactly the same. So every boomer and Generation Z that tells you to suck it up is full of crap, because they were making the same money you were and paying 400% less for their house.
When we talk about affordability for a moment, every time you go grocery shopping, things cost so much. A shout out to all the families that are feeding kids, because with these grocery prices, you might have to just choose your favorite, okay? You get to eat this week, you eat next week. Back to the article. When it comes to average rent in the United States, to a large degree, it mirrored the trends in housing market activity. However, rents across the U.S. have sustained fairly substantial growth, while home buying has slowed down. Using data sourced from Zillow's Zillow Observant Rent Index, ZORI, we decided to analyze the trends in average rent in various major cities. Here we're focusing on the average rent in Chicago. Despite witnessing its population decline steadily year after year, Chicago remains the third largest city in the U.S. because it's the best city ever. I love Chicago.
People are packing up and leaving Illinois apparently in large numbers.
And it may not surprise you that Chicago is losing the most.
The headline may not be a surprise, but the reason may be it's not violence or shootings, but taxes. Now, this is based on census data that was analyzed by the Illinois Policy Institute that shows that exodus has cost Illinois about $8.5 billion. And it found nearly 80% of Illinois cities lost population in 2021. More people said goodbye to Chicago, though, than any other city. Only San Francisco and New York lost more. 45,175 residents left Chicago between July 2020 and July 2021, a whopping 40% of the state's total population loss. The analysis shows jobs, housing, and tax policy are driving people away. And the people moving here tend to earn a lot less than the people leaving. It's about a 41% difference. So where are people headed? The largest numbers headed southwest to San Antonio, Phoenix, and Fort Worth.
According to the Census Bureau 2021 American Community Survey 5-year estimates, the population of Chicago is about 2.8 million, having just under 500,000 more residents than Houston, whose population is 2.3 million. As America's third largest city, Chicago naturally has a ton of housing units, but despite a year-over-year decline in average rent from November 2019 to November 2020 of 4.4%, rents have been on the rise ever since then in the Windy City. So just because it says that we have a ton, quote unquote, ton of housing units, that doesn't mean they're all quality.
On light, Jimmy baby.
According to Zillow's data, the estimated average rent in Chicago is $1,925 as of November 2022, the most recent rental data available at the time of this article. While that figure is certainly cheaper than the average rent in America's largest city, New York, with an average rent of $3,353 for that same month, as well as cheaper than the nation's second largest city, Los Angeles, with an average rent of $2,915. Chicago's average rent is comparatively expensive for the Midwest region of the U.S. Yeah, if you have lived in the Midwest and all you've known is Midwest prices, not including Chicago, then the Midwest is rather affordable compared to those largest cities, New York and LA and various parts of California. But if you think about it, Chicago is still really affordable compared to those larger metro areas. So again, New York with the average rent of essentially $3,400, and then Los Angeles with the average rent of just under $3,000. I mean, if you have a good job, then affording that type of rent is okay. But if you're struggling, or if you're trying to buy your own place and save for that down payment, then putting $3,000 toward rent isn't ideal. Here's a look at how the average rent in Chicago of $1,925 stacks up against some other Midwest cities for November 2022. So then it gives the average rent in a variety of other cities, including Minneapolis, Cincinnati, Columbus, Indianapolis, Detroit, Cleveland, Kansas City, Missouri, Omaha, St. Louis, and Milwaukee. Shout out to Columbus. The average rent in Chicago is more expensive than all 10 of these major cities in the Midwest, with Minneapolis the closest at an average rent of $1,649. Indeed, the growth rate in the average rent in Chicago is among the most robust in the Midwest region. From November 2021 to November 2022, Chicago's average rent rose by 8.6%, from $1,773 to $1,925. So what, up $150 or so? However, looking at Chicago's average rent through the lens of the average annual growth from 2017 to 2022 reveals a different picture. Chicago's 5-year average growth rate in rent was only 3.6% per year. Their 5-year average growth rate in rent. Compare that to Indianapolis's 5-year average growth rate of 8.1% per year, Cincinnati's 7.8% per year, and Detroit's 7.7% per year, just to name a few. In terms of this 5-year metric, the annual growth in Chicago's average rent is sluggish compared to the other 10 Midwest cities listed above, with the exception of Minneapolis. That city experienced a 5-year average growth rate in rent of only 2.4% per year from 2017 to 2020. So, despite assumptions and images of Midwest cities as declining industrial urban areas, many of them are displaying dynamic growth in their rental markets. The article further continues into breaking down average rent in Chicago by zip code. I won't get into all those details just because I don't feel like it, number one. And secondly, because many of you might not even live in Chicago, so it might not be of interest to you. But if you want to take a look at it, you can see the 10 most expensive zip codes in Chicago. And I think that's all for now. Thanks for listening.